After waiting for a half hour for my bus to come while at Bowling Green, it's time to finally go home to Staten Island. By the way, my wait wasn't too bad because, like you saw, I was able to catch them 3 buses for ATV shorts and also caught these cute little birds playing in the puddle at Bowling Green. You know why I'm happy that I'm not endorsed by any particular bus manufacturer? It's because I could freely speak my mind about the advantages and disadvantages of some products. For instance, diesel buses commendably are the cheapest on the market, but the fuel is the most expensive. If CNG buses have a cheaper fuel, but the bus itself is more expensive. Electric buses are expensive and they only go at a limited range and take a prolonged period of time to completely recharge without using a fast charging system. And fuel cell buses, even though they're very efficient and stuff, they're very expensive. And that's why here in the United States alone, there's only a limited number of people with fuel cell buses. So where do trolley buses come in the mix? Now, one thing I must commend about trolley buses over electric buses, and I must admit this myself even though I prefer electric buses, is the fact that with an electric bus, if a company wishes to have the buses run 24 hours a day nonstop, they have the option of having different chargers through en route available if needed. Trolley buses don't need that. Like some AC powered electric trains, basically, there's a catenary overhead and they use a pantograph to receive power. Now, what about the idea of, let's say they have to like reroute somewhere, or something happens to the overhead wires for some reason. If they have to put the pantograph down, do they have power left? The answer is yes. I actually asked this question to New Flyer on Twitter when they were mentioning about the advantages of their trolley buses, and they actually told me that they got an additional battery pack on board if necessary. Even some older trolley buses, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe some of them actually use diesel fuel if necessary. So I have nothing against the manufacturers of trolley buses. In fact, I must commend New Flyer in particular, and look at me because I said that I wasn't endorsing any company. But what I must admire about New Flyer, and let's add Van Hool because they also make trolley buses in Europe, is that both have created buses for basically a not so strong market, but still are able to be courteous enough to have buses available for them. And don't get me wrong, if I ever visit Kings County or probably San Francisco, I do want to catch the New Flyer XT40 or XT60 someday. The only thing I don't like about a trolley bus system is the fact that they're using unsightly overhead wires to be able to go from place to place. Now, years ago, this technology would have been practical, but really trolley buses fall in the same line of hybrid buses, where it's really a technology that's no longer necessary. For instance, if I was to have, let's say, a dream fleet for Kings County Metro, I would recommend the New Flyer XT40 or XT60 for them only because they already have an existing trolley bus route. In fact, I would only recommend trolley buses for counties that already have an older trolley bus system or a fairly newer one, just because they already have it. I personally wouldn't want to invest in having just installing overhead wires in a brand new area that didn't have trolley buses to begin with. And honestly, the idea of the trolley bus system may probably last for, let's say, another 15 to 20 years or probably even 30 years. Afterwards, I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily see trolley buses around, and I wouldn't be surprised if companies like I've mentioned before suddenly change to a different market. Like for instance, instead of wired buses with pantographs, what if we could end up utilizing wireless technology? Now, there are some companies out there, for instance, that, are testing wireless technology where basically instead of plugging into the wall, like in a way, you could theoretically drive your electric car up to your house and it automatically starts charging. That's the technology that's basically out there. So, what if there's a region, for instance, that may end up using a series of electric buses that of course have the battery on standby if necessary, but basically instead of having the overhead wires, there could be almost like a third station to be able to power the buses wirelessly. And also, there doesn't need to be so many third stations, so to speak, because in a way, it's actually possible to have a great range to some extent. Like for instance, I ended up reading an article a few years back, and the longest Wi-Fi range in the world, which was achieved back in 2007, can go up to 237 miles. So basically, my theory is what if we could end up having somewhat of the same range, or perhaps even a greater range, just with a wireless energy frequency so that buses and everything else could be able to pick up this particular technology. In fact, that's one thing I would much rather see instead of power lines in particular. For instance, what if potentially at some point companies like Con Edison and others can go from having these big power plants, so to speak, to instead having or manufacturing small renewable devices that could be used to power our homes. Because in a way, I could see at some point probably seeing a device the size of like a 12-inch tablet to power each of our homes, and it could be used for multiple purposes. I mean, of course, that's when renewable energy becomes fully effective, where it doesn't need to be these giant big facilities or bulky items and everything. And it could also look attractive. Like I've seen in some neighborhoods lately how there's some that use solar panels to power their homes, and don't get me wrong, I commend the fact that they're using renewable energy. It's just the one thing that I don't personally like is the fact that there are many solar panels that don't blend into the roof, so to speak. Now, of course, there is the solar roof that Tesla has, for instance, but there's also other things that I've seen. For instance, there's a company at MIT, for instance, that has developed the transparent solar panel where basically you could have your windows turn sunlight into electricity for you. But that's just one of many examples. Either way, the possibilities are endless on what could potentially replace the trolley bus system. Because what I wouldn't mind seeing a New Flyer, for instance, creating like, let's say they have the Excelsior series for another 20 more years, or probably 10 more years, and we end up seeing the New Flyer XW40 or XW60, for instance, or maybe a XW35. Either way, we could probably see that technology pretty soon if all goes well, especially with New Flyer, because let's face it, they've created an autonomous bus, the Excelsior AV, which I have yet to see in person. Either way, what are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments.